as we bring our panel in. Bradley Devlin joins us, politics editor at the Daily Signal. Jonathan Cott is here as well, a Democratic strategist. So Axios has this scoop, our buddy Mark Caputo. What's next here? I guess the way to talk about it, Jonathan, is whether it speaks to something wider. We were talking about the Hegseth story and all this, and whether the kind of chaos is back or never went away in Trump 2.0. What do you make of this Bessent versus Musk?
I think, look, I disagree with Scott Bessent on almost everything, but he has a basic understanding of how the government works and how it functions and what you need to do to make it work, like the IRS, how Treasury, takes in taxes. Elon Musk proves every day he has no understanding about how the federal government works, and I'm sure it is pissing off a lot of the cabinet secretaries who have spent, a long career trying to get to this point and get there and then get undermined by this clown who has no idea what's going on and goes on TV and just repeatedly lies to the American people, and it's hurting the Trump administration. I'm sure Scott, eventually got pissed off and lost his temper, but it's, again, proving that the Trump White House is ruled by, chaos and disorder every day.
Usually a mild-mannered guy. Bessent, Bradley, make anything about this? It supposedly was about who was heading up the IRS, I think. But the wider, you have the Treasury Secretary of the United States, the richest person on planet Earth, basically getting face-to-face and screaming at each other. Mark's reporting said it was very, very loud right outside the Oval. What would you say about it? I know the press secretary said there's disagreements among the president's staff and cabinet sometimes. Would think it's part of a healthy process, essentially. There she is, Caroline Levitt. How about you, Bradley?
Well, it is part of a healthy process. We have to remember that these people are apex predators that find themselves working together in government. Scott Bessent, yes, he's mild-mannered, but someone doesn't just make it the way that he's made it on Wall Street and in the financial industry by going along and getting along, right? This is what he did with Soros and others to the pound, for example. That's a boss move. Same thing with Elon, with the technical innovations that he's overseen at SpaceX, Tesla, etc. There's a reason why he's the richest man in the world, and there's a reason why President Donald Trump rose through the ranks in the cutthroat world of New York real estate. So, yeah, these explosions are going to happen, but let's actually focus on how they've worked together in the past. And they've worked together on making sure that DOGE has the proper information from the Treasury Department so that it can go about its work finding waste, fraud, and abuse. We've heard this similar story with Marco Rubio in the past and Elon Musk,
That's
where
right.
the two continue to work together on DOGE efforts, and now Rubio restructuring the State Department, right? So let's focus on what they're actually doing with one another and making sure that the administration is moving forward with these plans that the American people voted for, rather than getting stuck in shouting matches outside the Oval.
Okay, let's talk about that then a little bit. You're right. I forgot about the Rubio thing. That was at the cabinet meeting, supposedly. So let's talk about the story of the day, which I think is China, in a couple of different ways. I think we have a clip from Bessent in his comments, and we'll talk about what the Chinese said as well. This idea that maybe now, and again, the president apparently was showing some numbers that were pretty rough for the economy. We're changing our tune with China. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Can there be a deal? Here's how the Treasury Secretary put things in his speech earlier today. Scott Bessent.
America first does not mean America alone. To the contrary, it is a call for deeper collaboration and mutual respect among trade partners. America First seeks to restore fairness to the international economic system.
Okay, Bradley, you take this one first. America first, not America alone. And, of course, the president saying last night he could come down substantially on his tariffs against China. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Scott Bessent perfectly and succinctly articulates the America First mindset. Let's remember so much chaos was caused by Trump merely suggesting in his first administration and now again and with his second that NATO allies should meet the 2% defense expenditure of GDP requirement that the allies agreed to in entering into NATO. Same thing with trade barriers, right? There's a few different verticals that the Trump administration is pursuing at the same time. One is general regime behavior, so you're going to threaten tariffs on Western countries, let's say, who aren't living up to free speech ideals. We see this kind of with the UK and Vice President J.D. Vance. You have another vertical that's a revenue-generating mechanism, and you have another vertical that is a effort to negotiate lower trade barriers with certain countries. And you can only, these verticals kind of get braided together in a weird way, but let's isolate that effort to lower trade barriers. I think there's a reason why 130 nations have reached out to the Trump administration to strike new deals under the threat of these tariffs, right? Sometimes the U.S. government and the U.S. market is a giant ogre that can step very hard and very loudly on things to get them to move, and that's kind of what happens here. The American marketplace is so powerful that it can do that, and it's always been about making sure that folks are living up to their defense commitments and folks are living up to their economic commitments and arrangements.
Take your point, especially about the NATO. What I would say about the tariffs, though, is that there's an economic reality of the actual tariff numbers that were put in place, to the extent that, as high as we were or are on both countries, 145, 125, you're essentially freezing trade with this huge country, the second largest economy in the world and the first and the largest in us, Jonathan. And then you got to make a call here if you're going to, how long this is going to go on, if you can't cut the deals in time, because as we said earlier, otherwise you're going to be paying through the roof, or you're going to have empty store shelves. And I think that's what the president had to deal with here. And the question is whether he put himself in a tough spot or he can cut a deal from here. What do you think happens next?
I have no idea what happens next, and apparently neither does Donald Trump, because this trade tariff policy was so great. It was the most beautiful word he had ever heard during the campaign. We have yet to see any benefits of it. All that has happened is the market lost trillions of dollars, and teachers and union workers lost millions in their pension funds. So every day there's a new spin and a new story coming out of the White House about how these tariffs are so great and how Donald Trump is the greatest negotiator and is playing the art of the deal against all these other countries, and yet we've seen no benefit. The only thing we've seen from this is Donald Trump backtracks and is proven to be weak on the world stage every time he puts one of these ridiculous tariffs in, and then realizes, oh my God, it's not working because the guy who's advising me, Peter Navarro, has no idea what he's doing. And people like Scott Bessent have to step in and say, okay, let the real people take over and let's right this economy. I'm hoping that Scott Bessent can actually play more of a leadership role and push people like Peter Navarro to the side, and maybe we can stabilize this. Democrats would be happy to work with the Trump administration on taking on China. We did it in the last administration with the CHIPS Act, which is apparently something they want to get rid of, despite the fact that it actually is bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S., something that these trade tariffs have not done.
You also left the tariffs in place.
Many of them, but not at these rates, right, Bradley? I mean, not at these rates.
He put them in place, and then he took them away, and then he put them in place, and then he took them away, and then he put them in place on, You left a lot of the Trump tariffs in place under Biden, which is true, but not at these rates, Bradley, right? Like, not at the rates we are, and certainly not at the rates that were talked about on that ridiculous chart that the president came out with on the so-called Liberation Day. Nobody knew where that came from, or when they did explain it, then a lot of people on both sides, if we're being fair, said this doesn't make any sense. So it leaves us in a spot now, I think it's kind of a tough spot to negotiate out of, Bradley. Isn't that fair? You got to Jonathan's point, which I think is a fair point, you got to show us something. You got to cut some sort of a deal here pretty soon.
I think there will be a deal cut. We're talking specifically about China here. They wanted to get a Phase 2 deal done. I think they will get that Phase 2 deal done.
Or at least with some other country, some sort of a deal, something to show, something.
How about any country? One country cuts a deal.
We've heard incredibly positive movements towards a new deal with the United Kingdom.
We've not heard one deal cut. Not one deal cut. Every day the White House says all these countries have reached out.
Let Bradley finish this point, because I think, but I think it is a fair. I think the larger point's a fair one, Bradley. That you got to show us something here at some point, right?
Right, and I think they will be showing us something here. We've heard positive movements on the UK front, and particularly positive movements on the India front, which is one of the more protectionist countries. So let's see how these chips actually fall. I think Phase 2 with China is on the table. I think they're going to have a lot of rethinking about how they approach these national security issues. We're looking for immediate benefits here, but this is something that we need to play the long game with. And I agree to a certain degree that some of the more erratic backs and forths with trade policy policy might not be helpful, but it is helpful when bond yields take an unexpected turn and you have to do something in order to continue to right the economy, right? That's the number one issue that this administration got elected on, that and immigration. They need to continue that. But nevertheless, they're going to renegotiate these deals with some of these countries, and then they're going to return to a phase 2 deal with China that makes sure that critical infrastructure are secured for not only our generation, but our children's generation and their children's generation.
We'll come back to it. Thank you both, as always. Jonathan, Bradley Devlin as well. It's 12 past the hour. Got a couple of other things to get to here.